September 1996, Halifax, Nova Scotia. Hollywood director James Cameron is filming a little blockbuster called Titanic.
But this time, use more of your throat and hawk it back and...
They were wrapping up their last night and getting ready to move to Mexico for the rest of the movie. But none of them could have guessed how their last night would have gone. After starting work at 5 o'clock, their lunch was at midnight, and in the mess hall, they found a tremendous spread. Shrimp, lobster, and a heavenly clam chowder. It was so good, many crew members went back for seconds. Unbeknownst to the crew though, this clam chowder had a special ingredient.
I want some fancy sauce.
Someone had poured a pound of phencyclidine, or PCP, into the soup. After half an hour, things started to get weird. Marylin McAvoy, one of the painters, was having trouble doing simple tasks. She started to feel fuzzy and couldn't focus. Barber started feeling symptoms too.
My arm started going numb, and then the world begins to tunnel in a little bit.
Now this is a lot worse than you might think, because these symptoms sound a bit like paralytic shellfish poisoning, or PSP, a sometimes fatal neurotoxin. But the crew isn't thinking PSP, PCP, or any other P besides I want to see a doctor.
What's that spell?
However, James Cameron knew something was up.
Jim got so upset with a cast member that he turned on his freezing rays and shattered him.
When he started feeling sick, he ran to the bathroom and made himself throw up to try to get any substance out of his system. Now, one of the side effects of PCP is paranoia, so when some of the crew started stepping outside for fresh air, everyone else began to follow them. Pretty soon, the majority of the crew found themselves outside, wondering why they were feeling so weird. Ambulances and vans arrived to ferry the ailing crew members to the closest hospital, Dartmouth. Now, Halifax isn't known for its massive population, so this hospital is small. And it's 2 a.m. The numbers on how many people were affected differs based on who's telling the story.
Like 85 crew members.
And so all of a sudden, here's 150 crew members.
But according to the police report, it was 51 persons. So 51 people come stumbling into this tiny hospital showing fun symptoms. The doctors examined some of the crew, and after hearing that everyone ate the chowder, they decided that it must have been PSP. It is important to note that the crew ingested a psychedelic, and your experience on said psychedelic is heavily impacted by the mood and attitude you have at the time. So when the doctors come shoving a clipboard in their face saying, yeah, you're gonna die, it didn't exactly calm their nerves. Nightmare. So the doctors did the only thing they thought they could do.
They set up phones for us and allowed us to call back to wherever we were from. I called my wife and told her to put the kids on the phone. I had 2 daughters, and they were very little, and I told them I loved them and told them goodbye.
Then the tone turned. Someone started playing a guitar, and one of the camera assistants heard the music. So he sat up in his gurney and proclaimed, "You know what we need? A conga line." So the guitarist begins playing a jam, and the crew congaed around throughout the hospital for a bit. James Cameron did not join the conga line, although he looked on from the sidelines. At about this time, Bill Paxton is looking over the mixed bag of reactions and realizes that the hospital is going to have no way of taking care of them all. So he decides to use his own special medication.
I'm gonna wander, because it was only a few blocks from the set. I'm gonna wander back down and just drink a case of beer.
The doctors are starting to think that something's up, because people don't act like this on PSP. So therefore, it must be some sort of poison or substance, right? Great, then let's give them this liquid activated charcoal stuff that we use to treat poisons.
I got some jelly beans.
By the way, if you're ever poisoned, don't eat the charcoal in your fire pit. It's not the same thing. There was just one little oversight. Liquid charcoal is awesome for poisons because it binds to anything in your stomach and gets rid of it. But it gets rid of it in the worst possible way. So roughly 50 people are all expelling from every orifice down any drain they could find. Sinks, toilets, nothing was safe. But it wasn't all down the tubes. John Landau, one of the producers on Titanic, was looking to lighten the mood. He'd just flown in, and he was stone cold sober. Someone began waxing poetic about the iconic American restaurant A&W. Apparently, they'd passed one on the way to the hospital, and soon everyone was dreaming about smooth, creamy root beer floats. So Landau found the restaurant and got the A&W to open up and mix up some floats. And the crew got their fill of bubbly, frothy root beer floats while tripping on PCP. At around 8 a.m., the effects began wearing off. The crew went to sleep and finished their shooting the next night. But there's still the question. Who spiked the chowder in the first place? Well, It's complicated, and no one ever got charged. But if we want to play detective here, we have to establish a means and a motive. Now, Marylin believes it was a chef who was the culprit, while Cameron thinks it's the opposite.
We believe the story is that it was somebody who had a beef with the caterers, because the first thing we did was fire the caterers.
Other theories floating around are that it was just a harmless prank.
He's got friends, bro.
Another theory is that it was a rival studio who spiked the chowder. Big brains only on this channel.
Of course, the operant theory was that I was such a psychomaniac that they were trying to get back at me, but I reject that theory out of hand for obvious reasons.
But what were the police doing? Well, they had two leads. Lead 1 was a crew member who was fired for selling drugs and rehired by Cosmetics and Wardrobe. Great, they were on set the day of the spiking, and they had a motive, right? Well, apparently it wasn't enough because they weren't arrested. Lead 2 was a security guard who came forward and mentioned some strange behavior from someone the night of the spiking. But this wasn't followed up on because it was a secondhand account and no names could be verified. And so the story was up for speculation until February of this year, when Jamie Barber gave his story.
And the craft service guy, he was smoking a joint, and Jim Cameron caught him and had him fired. He came by that day to pick up his paycheck, because he was friends with the caterers, talked to the caterers, talked to the crew, and then left.
Now this is where things get a little more interesting.
The next day, he ran into one of the crew members outside the hotel and asked him how their trip was the night before.
Ooh.
So what now? From what I've seen, everyone was fine after the chowder incident, despite the trauma of a bad trip. The crew had to move to Mexico quickly, and they didn't have time to sit down and play 20 questions with the police. Now, if someone had died or was seriously injured, they would have put a lot more energy into finding the culprit. That leaves us with nothing to do but sit on the sidelines and speculate.
Which will come right back here to the port boat deck. You see,